Hello, I'm Jeff Hake, and today we're going to be making fruit leather with black currants and maple syrup. I'm really excited to be here. I'm Jeff Hake with Homegrown Heritage Fruits and Grains, as Jacqueline introduced me. This is a really exciting thing for me because this is making fruit leather like this with actual real fruit and really good sweetener has been kind of a passion project for me for the past few years, and it's turned into a product for our farm that I'm really proud of. Just to show you, these are the black currant right here. They are, the variety that we grow on our farm is not really like a known variety. These are actually grown by Canopy Farm Management, which is nearby here. And these are a variety of black currants that are bigger, juicier, and sweeter. And they're tart, but this variety is like about as sweet as black currants can get, and they are super delicious. So I actually don't even mind eating them straight. If you like tart things and you've never had a black currant, definitely try these out sometime. As we work to get more perennial crops out there in the Midwest, we hope that you'll start to see more and more of these available out there, either fresh when they are harvested in midsummer or frozen all year round. That would be really ideal, just so you always have fresh local black currants available. So fruit leather is a really great way to preserve fresh fruit. It locks in just about as much flavor as you can get. And in some ways, it's actually easier than making like a preserve or a jam. And the reason is that you're basically taking whole fruit, you cook it down, you take out the parts you don't want, and then you cook it, you technically cook it down more by dehydrating until you've taken out so much water from it that it's basically shelf stable. Because there's so much sugar in it and so little water, that basically means that unless it gets wet again because of a lot of humidity or because it gets water splashed on it, if it sits in the sun, there's only a few ways that it really can go bad once you've gotten it down to the fruit leather stage. So I'm here representing Funk's Grove Heritage Fruits and Grains, but you're probably more familiar with Funk's Grove Pure Maple Syrup over in Shirley, Illinois. That's my wife's family that's been running the syrup shop there for 6 generations now, since the since the 1820s. And so there's a lot of different sweeteners you can use for this, but we have a lot of maple syrup available. So that's the one that we use. I feel like this is a question that should come up at some point, so I'll get ahead of this one, is that we have also made fruit leather with honey before. We made a pear, this is Katie's idea. It was really good, and I want to make it again as a product maybe. It was pear, honey, and dried shiso. Really delicious. So the cool thing about this is that once you have the basics down, you can start experimenting with it. There's a lot of things you can really do. So that's what we're going to do, is get the basics here. So to get started, we have you can start with completely frozen fruit or with fresh fruit. This is frozen fruit that has since thawed a little bit. It really doesn't matter as long as it hasn't gone bad, I guess, and it's super simple. This is 4 cups or about 2 pounds of fruit. Just put it in your pan. I was saying before we started that actually I'm going to turn this on once the fruit's already in there, because if you put cold fruit into the hot pan, it can actually just burn the first thing that it touches. After that, it'll be okay, but if you're starting off with burnt fruit, you're going to be really disappointed. So you can combine all that in there, get as much of the juice out as possible, because every little bit of this will then cook down just a little more, and that's all your good stuff in there. So I'll use my rubber spatula and get this all out of there. Every last bit. Because I will say, I love doing this. It's also a lot of work. It's a lot of steps, a lot of things to go through to get these really delicious snacks. So you really don't want to waste any of this. Food is a precious gift, and you don't want to have that go down the drain. So get all that in there. Scrape that off. And then the way I wrote the recipe that you'll have there, or what we usually use, is maple syrup, of course. I did have half a pint of walnut syrup left over from last year. So I'm going to use that instead. This is a product that we're also working on at the syrup shop. Basically, instead of tapping maple trees, we're tapping black walnut trees. It's really pretty similar to maple, but it's got some interesting little characteristics. I've actually never made fruit leather with this before, but I'm sure it's going to come out just the same way. It's the same sugar concentration and everything. So I'm going to put all this in there as well. And again, you don't want to waste it. So oftentimes I'll pour this all out, and as I'm just getting started, I'll just leave this like that for a little while just to get everything flowed out of there. I'm gonna put this on, I'm learning a new stove today. I'm gonna put this on 250 to start, but basically like a low medium heat. A really important part about this stage, and this is where I'll start talking about some other fruits you can use as well. It's easy to get a little impatient with this part and try to cook it a little faster with a lot of these smaller fruits. So if you're doing black currants or red currants or blueberries or things like that, it's really easy to just not even notice that it's burning on the bottom until you go to stir it, and then you can feel it crunching on the bottom of the pan. It's not the worst thing because probably that stuff will just stay stuck to the bottom of the pan. And when you go on to the next stage, you can just don't scrape that stuff off and try to keep it, because then you're just adding like a charred flavor to your fruit leather. It gets worse when you're doing something. I've been more disappointed with this when I'm doing other things. The one that was most disappointing was making pear fruit leather. Pear is a really subtle flavor, and if it overcooks, you get a lot of sugar out of it. It's caramelized, it gets a darker color, but that lighter color and that bright pear flavor can actually get cooked out really easily at this stage if you try to push it too much, or if you try to cook too much at once and the bottom is actually starting to caramelize, and then you stir it in and you realize, oh, I've actually overcooked this whole thing. And you can still make fruit leather out of it. It's fine. It's just, it doesn't get as much of that really good flavor as you want. A little harder to get black currants wrong. These have so much flavor. These are a real kick in the mouth. So it's more just about try not to burn the bottom of this. Still getting this syrup out of there. So this is actually going to cook for quite a while. So the way I've set this all up is I have everything already made in stages. Probably by the time the runtime when this class is done is when this first stage will be done. So I just wanted to show you what we're doing here. So that's about enough of that. So let's see, how should we do this next? Well, I guess I'll show you what the next stage should look like once this is done. The trouble with this part is that it's a little subjective of knowing just when it's actually ready to move on to the next stage. It's actually already getting to a low boil there, which is good. Kind of a low boil, high simmer is kind of what you're going for with this. And it's just going to keep doing that for a long time. It's good to just keep it stirred occasionally, just make sure you're not, overcooking it or anything. And also just make sure that it's just all of it's cooking somewhat evenly, because sometimes the stuff in the bottom is cooking a little hotter than the stuff on the top. There's a couple of ways to just kind of judge when this is done, and the more you do it, the more comfortable you'll get with it. But usually, so this is, you can't really see in the picture. It's about right here, and once it cooks down to right about here, just like because you'll see the line of where the fruit has been in the pan prior. So as it like cooks down about a little less than halfway, that's about when it's done. You'll also just notice that it'll look thicker, and just a little less runny, and the fruit will look a lot less familiar than when it started. It will look like this. Actually, I'll use this scoop. So this is cold, so it's actually even like thicker than it would be normally, but it's pretty, you can barely tell the fruit apart from one another. And it's pretty goopy. I know, I'm really selling it. But honestly, I mean, this just by itself as like a sauce would probably be pretty good. And then what I'll show you next is you're going to take this and you're going to run it through a food mill or a sieve. And what we're going for there is more like this. Is this like rich, actually the word this era used before this was silky, like just delicious sauce. I mean, you could honestly stop there if you wanted and just eat this and you'll be very happy. And because there's so much sugar in it and because it's so tart and acidic, you can just put this fresh in the fridge and it'll probably last for many months in there. We've had some of this that has lasted for over a year, just like this in the fridge. So you won't have any fruit leather that way, but you'll probably still be happy with it. So this is when we get to the tedious part. And I will tell you that when you make, as a business, we're in need of really scaling up on how we do this. Because right now we're still using basically a kitchen food mill. And the way this works, if you've never seen one, these are actually used most often for just like grinding things up. So a lot of times people will use this to make tomato sauce. You could run mashed potatoes through this. The way we use this is to separate out. There's a lot of seeds in black currants, and you can make fruit leather without doing this step, but it's not something I would want to sell, and I don't really enjoy eating it that much. So we go through this rather tedious process to get the seeds out. It also helps get, there's usually some stems in there, maybe some non-plant things in there because these are machine harvested. This is still boiling up. So as this goes, also some parts, there's like little stems in here and stuff, and you'll start seeing them separate off the fruit. That just means that it's doing what you want. It's starting to break down. Also, I find it good as it goes. Some of the black currants juice will build up on the sides, either because it's like just boiling slowly and popping, or because it's reducing down. Scraping that off and getting it back into your finished product is definitely a good idea, because that's some of the most concentrated juice that's in there, and that's the stuff we want, and we don't want to waste it. Normally, what would happen is you'd cook this down eventually, and you can run it through the food mill hot or cold. I usually do it cold just because I don't want to get it splashed on me or whatever. But you can run it through hot, and it might actually flow through better in some ways. I'll show you the food mill because this is neat, and that's what we have. So just take a scoop of this cooked down black currant and maple syrup thing. Oh, and I should say, I always do the black currant in with the maple syrup as well, because you're actually reducing both of them at the same time, and you want that all to go evenly. If you do the black currant first and you add the maple syrup is basically just sugar and water. It's 2/3 sugar and 1/3 water. And if you put water back into it, then you're going to have to either overcook, cook this down more than you wanted it and then level back up, or you're going to end up diluting what you cook down. So better just to cook it all down all at the same time. So here's the elbow grease. You just run this through here. I know you can't see this, but I can show you some interim bits here. So basically just crank this and crank this and crank this. And this is a very familiar experience for me of just doing this for minutes and then hours, and then what feels like days of your life. What that looks like coming out there, there's all the really good stuff. And just make sure you do it over a bowl that's of the right size and is stable enough for you to put a little pressure onto it. And as you're doing this, you got to do two additional things. One is that you can run it backwards, and it actually clears the screen that's in there. So it doesn't get every seed off, but it basically helps you collect it, and it'll drop it. I don't know if there's a way for me to show this. You run it backwards, and the stuff that you've already pushed through the sieve piles up on top of this plate here. And then you can use a rubber spatula or a spoon or whatever and get that out of there. Oh, I'm making a mess. Sheesh. And then the other thing you need to do, besides running it backwards occasionally to get it basically clear the screen and let more stuff through, is also just scrape the sides down and push it back under the pushing blade and onto the plate. And you'll do this quite a few times. This is a really good time to conduct a phone call with a loved one, or to listen to a podcast, or put on some really intense music to get your energy going, because have some kind of distraction. For me, it's talking to all of you to show how much you can get out with the food mill. So all that's left from, I think this was when I did 2 pounds, it was like a pound or a pound and a half of fruit, was just a small amount of pulp. And as you can see, it's still got that dark color, it's still got juice on it, and there's just only so much you can really get out of it. But as we were discussing before this class, what I like to do with this is put it in a jar, pour vodka or gin over it, or vinegar or something else for diffusing, and let that liquid just take up all this flavor. you can make some dangerous infused liquors with black currant pulp like this, red currant pulp. We've done quite a few. And it really makes it, the flavor really fills out. So like this amount, I would probably put maybe a half a pint of vodka around. And then you've got this like beautifully colored, beautifully flavored liquor for a special occasion. Makes really good cocktails. Yeah, and then also if you infuse a vinegar with it, you can end up making like black currant vinaigrettes, or just that sprinkled on a salad. It's good. Important thing about a food mill. And we've made this mistake before where you pick this up and you look at what's in your bowl and you're like, great, I'm done. But there's usually a bunch left over on the bottom as well. And that's going to be some of the thickest stuff. Like the best stuff is actually stuck on there. It's not a lot, but you don't want to waste it. You want all of that. Yep, back in the pan. Doesn't matter. It's all black currants. So you'll want to use a rubber spoon and scrape all that off as well before you take this all apart and clean it. That's the good stuff. So I'll just put this back here for now. This is still cooking down, but this is actually going fairly quickly. I could tell it's still got a little bit too much juice to it, but it's starting to drip a little more thickly, and probably another 10 minutes. Actually, this could be used. But let's move on to spreading it. And this is actually maybe the most tedious part, or it's like the most tedious and complicated. And this is the part where if you wanted to stop at the point where you've made this puree, I wouldn't blame you. But this is also how you make the cool snacks and make snacks for your kids that when they go to school, their friends will probably want to trade with them for what you sent them with because it's so good. So starting with a fresh roll of parchment paper here. Basically, you're going to cover the footprint of this baking sheet. Where do the scissors go? Oh, yeah. So we're just going to cut it. You don't have to be like too exact with this. You probably just want to have it rest pretty evenly in the bottom of the pan. So you can just eyeball it. You don't need to worry about it too much. And like that. And because this is the beginning, it's weird that I would have to specify this, but it actually is helpful, I swear. As you get further into this roll, it gets tighter and tighter and more curled. So you see how the edge is kind of sticking up a little bit. That can be kind of annoying, actually, especially, and sometimes it'll start curling up and you'll just have this little tube. If you turn it over, it'll stay flatter for you. And you can avoid the trouble of it trying to curl up on you. So just a little thing that we found saved us a lot of frustration. So then there's two ways of doing this part as well. When we first started making these, we were using a rubber spatula to spread the fruit leather around, and it works fine. It's okay. You basically, what ends up happening is you're using this almost like a paintbrush in some parts as you're trying to like really paint the corners. But that works fine. And on a home scale, most people have a rubber spatula kicking around. If not, these are super useful, especially if you're doing any part of this process as you're trying to get every last good little bit of stuff. But even though this still fits into a lot part of the process, we bought this is a frosting knife, right? We don't use it for frosting, so I couldn't remember the name for it. But it's what bakers use for putting frosting on cakes. Just like, it's a nice, really thin blade. You can get a lot of control with it. We found that that's the best thing for this process. Usually my standard scoop, though, is just one cup. This is really bendy. Oh, whoops, and I spilled some. Whatever. All right, so you put that down. And usually I try to just get a little extra off of there as well. But I'll be going back here anyway and getting that again, so it doesn't really matter that much. So one thing you'll find as you're doing this is that the paper is going to wrinkle slightly. It's just basically, it's just getting a little hydrated. Not a lot you can do about that. You'll find if you buy our fruit leather that looks a little different. So we have that dehydrator that we use. We're actually spreading on these like silicone, like fine silicone sheets that were very expensive, but they're very worth it for what we're trying to do, because we'll spread it on that instead. That doesn't wrinkle, and basically creates like one entirely flat surface on there. We'll then put the paper over top of that, and that's what it dries onto. And then when we're done, we'll hold onto the paper and the fruit leather and peel it off of the silicone sheet, and we have a flat strip when we're done. That being said, that's nice for our product, but it makes no difference at all for the actual quality of it. It's just the look. And it kind of makes things cleaner in a lot of ways for us as we're trying to do things on a large scale. So I'll just show this first with the spatula, and then I'll move over to my offset spatula. Thank you for telling me what that's called. I feel like that's a term I've heard, but I forget. So the finicky thing about this part is you really do want it even. I have a lot of light on this, which is nice. So basically my judgment on how thin I want it is going to be based on like just barely being able to see a little bit through it. It's like a little lighter color. Then it's like just thin enough for to be satisfied with. And like I said, you're kind of painting the corners. The nice thing again about doing this at home is that like getting this exactly even for us, we want it to be nice and square, use up every inch of the paper we're using and produce as much product as possible. With doing it at home, it doesn't matter as much. But the thing that does still matter is getting it even horizontally across the sheet. It doesn't matter if you don't hit the corners, because you're going to have a snack no matter what. But if you don't spread it as evenly as you can, it'll cook unevenly, and you get some parts that are crispy and some parts that aren't done yet. Or you'll get a bunch of parts that are crispy and then the rest is cooked okay. It's still edible that way, but it's like kind of eating like shards of fruit leather, and it's not super fun. Not really what you're going for. What we're going to end up with is like a nice, gummy, chewy, slightly juicy treat. So we're getting there. I'm going to switch to the offset so you guys can see how that's kind of nicer. I will advocate for it. I don't think they're super expensive either. So you can just kind of push down on it and it'll push out to your corners. And this is the part where you start really looking for where it's not consistently flat. And you can keep spreading it just a little further, get a little more out of it. Like that? Yeah. So, and it's pretty much stable like that. It's spread thin enough and it's thick enough as a material that it's actually not going anywhere. Finished product. Yeah, we did it, everyone. Is I think I put it in the fridge. And this is a sheet that I've already cut into, so it's only a partial sheet. But this is basically what the finished product will look like. It's not a great example because it's kind of gotten beat up as it's been in our fridge. But basically, just it's still kind of shiny, it's still kind of tacky. But I mean, the way that I often judge if a fruit leather is done, at this point, I've gotten a really good visual for it, so I don't need to be poking around on it anymore. But if I'm not sure, if I touch pieces of it, like I was saying before, it'll stick to your finger a little bit, but it won't actually like move. It might take the impression of your finger a tiny bit or something, but it won't actually like pull off of there, because if it's still mobile at all, then it's not going to stay intact, and it probably won't be shelf stable yet either. And what else do I need to tell you? So it should peel off this paper pretty easily. See, it comes right off. And the standard way that we package our fruit wowzers, our fruit wowzers is our brand name for them, is we cut it into these 1.5 inch strips like this. And then we roll it up. And with the parchment paper. Yeah, if you rolled up without the parchment paper, it'll all stick back together to itself, which is fine if you just want to eat it like that. And then you just got this like, I mean, you can actually take the fruit leather and take it off the paper and like fold it up and make a gummy, which is actually also really good. It's basically like this chewy fruit thing. And it's also, I've considered doing that too, but then that's still one more step that I have to do. But so then just have this finished roll. And then you can just peel it off and it's a delicious snack. So good. I'm still so happy with these. I love making these. Excuse me. Probably the easiest way, and the way that, again, we used to cut our fruit leather is just a pair of kitchen scissors, something pretty heavy duty. So like, I was just using this to cut the paper, but this probably wouldn't work to cut the fruit leather because it's thick enough and sticky enough that it'll actually fold, which is fine, except you're not getting a chance to cut it. It's just like kind of making a mushy mess out of it. So some good kitchen shears that are sharp will cut these really nicely. The way that I made that stuff there is actually you can use like a pretty fine sieve, and it's just that it's more work and it's less efficient in two ways. One is that, so basically you put this over a bowl and you're just pushing on the fruit, just kind of mashing it as much as you can. It's less efficient in two ways. One, it takes more time than using this because this is designed to apply more even pressure, and you have leverage with this crank on it, but also you just can't push as much of the fruit off of the seeds and the pulp as you can with the fruit mill. So other fruits, I was saying to Jacqueline and Sarah before the class that I sort of think of how to do the cooking for this fruit leather in two different veins, two basic like fruit types. Right now, basically what we're doing is like small juicy fruits. So this recipe for black currants and the individual steps that are involved can work just as well for, of course, we make red currants a lot. So yeah, following this recipe, mulberries, Juneberries, blueberries, all that good stuff. I bet strawberries would be killer. I've just never done it because we don't grow strawberries, at least not yet. And with those, I mean, and blueberries too, you're eating the seeds on those anyway, and you don't even care. So if you made fruit leather with that, you probably wouldn't care either. You could sieve it, but I don't know if I'd really bother. I mean, the only thing to keep in mind with that is that when you cook it down, the juice part cooks down, but the seeds don't. So you are concentrating more seeds into less total volume of the thing that you wanted. So I would say if you're gonna do something like strawberries, just try it first, and you'll probably be happy enough with it. And then if you are like, I can go for less seeds, try it again and run it through a really fine sieve. You probably need a strain even finer than this one because strawberry seeds are also very small. I've never done that before, but I do really want to, and I have no doubt that it would taste amazing. So there's that path, and then there's the other path of using larger pitted fruits, apples, peaches, pears, plums. You mentioned cherries before the call. We've never done cherry fruit leather either, and I don't know which way that would fall because that's a really juicy but pitted fruit. You would probably just, rather than cooking, because like the seeds on black currants are small enough you can't like separate them out by hand, but cherries you probably can. You'd probably treat those more like one of the larger tree fruits. Just pit them ahead of time. The difference with apples and pears, which is two of the ones that we grow a lot of and make a lot of fruit leather out of, is you're going to peel those ahead of time and cut the pits out ahead of time. So you just cut around the middle of the pear. Oh, I should have brought, dang, I have a really cool thing I should have brought to show you guys for peeling a lot of pears and apples. There's two different things that we use. One is the pretty classic like apple peeler core slicer. It's basically this 3-in-1 thing that you just shove the apple on, you turn a crank, And out comes basically like rings of apple that the skin is gone and the core is gone. I have found you can buy those at like a lot of hardware stores, especially in early fall when everyone's getting ready for apple harvest. I will say again, like the sieve, we're kind of grown out of those because if you use those as often as we have, you will wear one out in a season. Making, processing hundreds of apples, those things eventually just fall apart. But great for home scale stuff. There's also a thing called a rotato, which is meant for peeling potatoes. It's an electronic thing. Little plastic stand. You put it on this little spike, and then you put the peel on, and you hit a button, and it just turns the potato and peels it. And it works for pears, and it works for. It can work for apples. We found it really effective, particularly for pears. And I think. No, that was from our neighbor who we get a lot of pears from. That gave us that idea. Works really well because pears are otherwise really difficult to peel by hand or with that quarter slicer. So if you have a mature pear tree, you'll know how many pears you can really get. And I'd recommend the rotato. It's pretty effective. And I think that was also about the same cost as the food mill. So the difference then is that when all that fruit and syrup goes into the pan with the apples and pears and things, there's not a sieving step that needs to happen after that because the skin is gone, the seeds are gone, you've already done all that stuff. So that legwork happens before you start cooking. Our suggestion, because this is how we do our products, is especially with the apple, we add some cinnamon and some salt, just a little bit of salt, especially, but just enough to actually make it taste like apple pie. It's really amazing. Highly recommend that. The short answer is you can make fruit leather out of almost any kind of fruit. Most people don't. And they're, I think they're kind of like the standard, Excalibur is the kind of the standard 9-tray dehydrator. It's what we were using when we first started. I got it used for $150. It worked great for what we were doing. It's a plastic case, basic dials. It takes up about the size of a microwave on your counter. And we moved on to a bigger thing that had a little bit of a better fan and it had a little more capacity and more control. But I mean, a 9-tray dehydrator, it's a little bit of an investment, like any kind of electronic equipment will be in your kitchen. But once you start dehydrating like foods, you discover like, oh, this is really useful for a lot of things. You can dehydrate all kinds of stuff. It's a really simple way to preserve a lot of foods. But if you don't have that, most standard home ovens will go down to 170 degrees. And that's the way that I wrote this recipe. So that, and it still works just fine. Granted, I haven't tried it on every kind of fruit. So I don't know if some that's too hot for them, but I don't think it should be. All you'll need to do is just be keeping an eye on how it's actually looking in there. If it's somehow too hot for it and starting to look like it's browning in there, then maybe that fruit isn't going to work for that. But for the black currant, I had no trouble with that at all. It worked great at 170 for, what did I say, 3.5 to 4 hours. It depends on your stove. Some stoves, some people who just like, or your oven. I think I did rotate in our oven because ours has modest problems, and the longer it's in there, the more you notice those problems. So I think I rotated it once. Other ovens have a real bad time with not circulating heat effectively. So it's good just to keep an eye on it. It'll tell you, basically, you can see that this is really shiny and the shine will come off of it as it goes. It'll darken up just a little bit and some of that real shininess will go away. So if you're looking at it and one side's shinier than the other, that's probably time to rotate it. And I would use that over, because the other way to test if it's ready or not is poking it. And if it sticks to your finger, then it's not ready yet. And then you've made a weird little divot in your fruit leather.